Hello, welcome to the barn. My name is Joanne Knight. I'm taking a little break today and playing in standalone, and I have this quilt that is mine, and it's kind of a holiday quilt, and so I named it Holiday Happiness. And I've been staring at it for a little while on the design wall. It needs a little something extra, so I'm going to add this border fabric right here. And I am not kidding myself into thinking that I'm going to get this on the stitcher anytime soon, but I can start thinking about it and I can start playing with it. And so I have built a quilting mock up in my standalone, and this may or may not be the patterns that I end up with and the ones that I end up using, but I'm just looking at them and I wanted to give you a little tip on placing these background patterns in it. Normally what we have is a sashing, and we have that in here between the rows. It's only about 1.5 inches wide. And so we have that vertical and that horizontal sashing. But this time we've also got what I call a broken star. It's got parallelograms right here, and it has a sashing that runs both horizontally and vertically through that sashing. So you may be thinking, how am I going to put that pattern in there? And it's really easy to do. So I wanted to show you that whether I end up using these patterns or not. I can also take this mock-up that I ended up doing, and I can select it and I can save it as a full pattern just to be able to set the quilt up in repeat patterns and know what it's going to look like and whether I'm going to like it or not. The block is actually 13.5 inches. So what I did was set my grid at 1.5 inches, and I built a mock-up with draw line of what the block actually looks like, and that's what I've got right here. And I did that, and then I converted the draw line once I combined it to a boundary. So now I've got a boundary of the actual size of the quilt to be able to play with, because the image never comes in at the actual size of the quilt. So let me show you real quick how I would place these background patterns. These are patterns by Anita Shackelford. They're called ribs. It's easy enough to know to place the reverse and then the regular on the diagonal with point to point, but then you come to this sashing right here that you've got to jump over. And I don't want you to think that you have to stop there, because you can still sew this continually going all the way around. What we're going to do is use Joyce Lundgren's little trick that she has, and we're going to select our patterns, and I am going to start clicking right down here in the lower right. And I can see that I have the fat end of the half square triangle first. So what I'm going to do is select the half square triangle that has the fat side. And you also need the reverse of that pattern. The next thing that I'm going to do is say, okay, what's my next pattern? And this is my next pattern, and it has to click diagonally. So I'm going to hold down my control key, and I'm going to select the ribs pattern that clicks diagonally. Then the next half square triangle that I'm going to use starts with the smaller end of that half square triangle, and that's this one right here. So with my control key still held down, I'm going to select that one. That gives me a quarter of this layout, but I want to be able to travel across without stopping. So I have also added geometric line to my pattern list. I'm going to continue to hold down my control key, and I'm going to left click on geometric line, and I am going to let go of my control key. All I'm doing is auditioning patterns So I have set up a perfect grid. It doesn't mean the quilt is going to be perfect. I'm going to turn my snaps on, and I'm going to make sure that I have grid snap checked. Now I'm going to go up to draw pattern. I'm going to start right here on the left corner of that half square triangle. I'm going to click, go across and click, and now I'm going to do the geometric line to do the stitch in the ditch. Then when I click again, I get another half square, go across the diagonal, the next half square, geometric line, and I'm going to continue doing this all around this block. They are still individual patterns, so they can be adjusted the way that I need them to adjust. And because I want a continuous effort, I'm going to go back to the beginning and let the geometric line be my last click. And I'm going to right click and right click to end it. As individual patterns, when I'm using my machine head and I'm clicking on the quilt, I can still adjust these patterns if I want to. But what they're going to do is sew out continuously without stopping. Normally, when I'm working in standalone, I have, as I do here, my markers off. But I'm going to select one of these patterns and I'm going to turn my markers on so that you can see that I have one beginning and one end, and those patterns are going to sew all the way around. And I would do those background patterns first before I do the center patterns. And I'll use a micro quilter, so the little geometric line is going to end up being the stitch in the ditch that I need it to be. Now, what you may be thinking is this project is set up at 14 stitches per inch and 11 speed. And I don't necessarily want to do that stitch in a ditch at that speed. However, if I select one of the little geometric lines and I go to my little eye, you can see that that's going to stitch at speed 2, even though I concatenated them. And the reason it will is before I ever selected the patterns, I went into the geometric line pattern properties and I changed it to speed 2. So the little ribs are going to quilt at the same speed, and then when it gets to the geometric line, it's going to slow down, and then it's going to pick back up again when it gets next to the rib pattern. So that's another little trick for you, that if you slow that down in your pattern properties, then you don't have to worry about that. The second little thing I have for you, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'll just go ahead and delete it. This pattern right here, what I did on that one, and again, this may or may not be the one I end up using. This is a point-to-point pattern, and it is by Nancy Hackey, and you're going to see that right there. I'm going to select that pattern, and again, I'm going to cheat because I'm just auditioning patterns, and I'm going to click it point to point in the first one. When I go back up to the second line and click the second one, you can see that it's not oriented the correct way. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to select this pattern, and I'm going to tell CreativeStudio with a right click that I want to mirror this pattern, and I'm going to click my first point on the computer screen and click my second point, and I get a mirror of that pattern. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to order join to make sure everything is sewing in the correct order. Now I'm going to take that pattern and I'm going to move it right over here. I'm going to change to F11 handles. My grid snap is still on, so I'm going to snap that to the grid just like that. When I do that, it starts on the left and it ends on the right, so it is a valid point-to-point pattern. I'm going to select it. I'm going to right click. I'm going to save that pattern, and I'm just going to put test on here and not put it in my database, but just put it in my project file. I'm going to save and close. Let's delete these. Now I'm going to go back to my mock-up, and I'm going to select that one and go to draw pattern, and with the head of my machine I can click those points and it will place that pattern right there. That's a whole lot easier than putting these things 8 at a time. I would still draw boundaries on that, and I can go to circular array. Now this is telling me that my quilt group size limit is reached, and the reason that it's telling me my quilt group size limit is reached, I think, is because I have a image in this quilt group, and normally I don't work in the same quilt group that my image is. So let me take my boundary, and I'm going to convert that boundary to a pattern, and it's got a lot of jump stitches, but that's okay. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to a new quilt group, and I'm going to paste it just like this, and I am going to convert it back to a boundary, and I can select the pattern, and I can do my placing of that pattern back again. Now, I didn't put it on the grid, but that's okay. This is just auditioning. That's all we want to do. So I have the pattern selected. Now I'm going to go to circular array, and it does it. So that kind of backs up my theory about that image in the quilt group size. I'm going to disconnect, connect, uncheck it, and I'm going to move these right in here. So this shows you what it's going to look like on the quilt. On my quilt, I would still place them with drawn boundaries point to point, because that's going to be the easiest way to do that, because I have definite points. I still need those boundaries. So that's just a couple of ideas for you on a quilt like this that may look just a little bit unusual, and having those sashes go both vertically and horizontally between the blocks and as sashing. I may not end up with these patterns. I don't know. By the time I get to load it, who knows what I'll end up with. But I did want to show you an easy way to be able to place those patterns using concatenating and putting them in your quilt. So I hope that helped you a little bit. I'm doing a lot of Control Z's to get it back so you can see what that final background quilting looks like. I'm a little bit more modern, but I'm thinking I want to go a little bit feathers on this one because it's such a pretty quilt. But this feather might be just a little bit too much because that's a really small space. So who knows? We'll see what I end up with. Thank you for joining me at the barn. I'll see you next time.